Welcome to Resistance Live. Since 2017, Resistance Live has been the go-to home for political and legal news and analysis through a decidedly progressive activist lens. I'm your host, Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. I'm a former Wall Street and human rights lawyer, a lifelong organizer, and a leadership and impact consultant for all those seeking to lead big progressive change in these incredibly challenging times. To get bonus broadcasts, ask questions, and more, don't forget to become a paid subscriber to the show at patreon.com/resistancelive. And to learn more about what we do to help progressive leaders everywhere, check out GaiaLeadershipProject.com. And now, here's today's show. Hi, everybody. Welcome. For a second there, I was muted. Good to see you all, and welcome to a special Monday broadcast of Resistance Live, which we are doing this week because it's Thanksgiving week, and I won't be here on Thursday and Friday. So we have a lot to talk about. It was a very eventful weekend, actually, after our broadcast on Friday. Particularly, we had breaking news Friday night out of this meeting between Trump and Zohran Mamdani in the Oval Office that, if you were like me, had you kind of laughing all weekend. The images are ridiculous and hilarious, and that's why one of them is the thumbnail on our YouTube broadcast for today. But I did want to mention a couple of things here because there are some takeaways from this event that really have not been acknowledged very much in mainstream media at all. And I wanted to take a second to just talk through what we saw and why it's a much larger victory than just what I've seen some commentators say, which is like Trump just falls for anybody that charms him. I actually think there are some much larger takeaways from this particular meeting that are relevant for purposes of not just the 2026 election cycle, but really for all of our own organizing, because it was flawless. I mean, I think we all know that looking back now at what was reported out of this event, the way that Mamdani comported himself, the things that he said, the things he refused to say, the way in which he even appeared in the photographs. Normally, and we all know Zohran is a huge smiler. We didn't see that in the photographs. There wasn't any indication of complicity or endorsement. And so when I was getting ready for the broadcast this morning, I made a list of things that I really think were huge takeaways from this that are relevant. And so we're going to go through them. All right. So first things first. One of the things that was really impressive about not just what was reported about their private meeting, but actually what took place on camera in the Oval was that we did not see Mamdani compromise on his values at all. There was no attempt to pander to the MAGA base. There was no, as I said, even implied endorsement of Trump. There was no kind of like catering to white male perspectives. It was very much a refusal, an absolute refusal to just sanitize what he stands for. And that in and of itself was a really interesting takeaway because he clearly had been very straight with Trump, right? It's not like he sat down in the Oval and was like, ICE is okay, right? We know from the reporting that, in fact, he didn't. And so that one is, a very significant takeaway. The second one, which is related, is that we didn't see him back down or cave from anything, including under inquiry from the White House press corps, which, by the way, many of you may not know now, is literally just packed with Trump supporters. It's actually, the White House press corps has been gutted to the point that all but one of the interviewers in the Oval Office for that event was from far right-wing media, Fox, InfoWars, a couple of bro podcasters, and they were asking questions that were designed to kind of support up Trump's original claim that Mamdani is a communist, which of course he isn't, that were designed to shore up the idea that he was a jihadist, which of course he isn't. And so one of the things that was so fascinating about how Mamdani handled himself was that he literally owned exactly who he is. He freely said on camera, I'm a democratic socialist. When he was asked the question, you said Trump is a fascist, is he a fascist? Trump was like, you can just say yes. Like, he got Trump to admit that he is a fascist and simultaneously repeated it himself. So this idea of not backing down in the face of challenge, I also think is a really significant takeaway. By the way, all of these are relevant for Dems going forward, right? I mean, I want to point out just with these first two things, we need Democratic candidates who don't throw trans people under the bus, who don't throw immigrants under the bus, who don't claim that somehow we need some version of ICE, right? We need candidates who don't back down in the face of propagandist questioning. So these are really significant takeaways. The third thing that was a takeaway from this was really speaking the truth, right? Mamdani, I didn't think I would live to see the day where there would be an elected mayor of the nation's largest city, not yet the mayor, but soon to be the mayor on January 1st, standing in the Oval Office, calling what is happening in Gaza a genocide, and saying out loud to the president of the United States that US dollars are funding a genocide. And, by the way, Trump didn't balk at that, which is also really fascinating. So one of the things here that I think we have to remember as organizers, and also for candidates that we support, is we need them being willing to speak the truth, right? We need them to not put mayonnaise on the sandwich, as the saying goes. We need them to not water it down or dumb it down. We need them to tell the truth. And we need them to tell the truth even in the most high stakes environments out there. So again, another really big takeaway. The fourth thing, which is interesting, I spent some time thinking about this one a lot over the weekend, because one of the things that was reported out of the private meeting between Mamdani and Trump was that Mamdani was on a quest to convince Trump that they could find common ground, meaning that, Mamdani cares about making New York City safe. Now, his definition of safety is different from Trump's. I think we all know that. Trump wants illegal immigrants, what he calls illegal immigrants, because no human being is illegal, out of the entire nation, right? And he thinks that's what constitutes safety, right? For Mamdani, it means something very different. It means kind of actually redirecting money away from a militarized police force, perhaps, and in other directions subsidized housing and subsidized supermarkets and free buses and rent freezes and all that other kind of stuff. So, this idea of trying to find a way to get Trump on board so that Mamdani can do the work that he is elected to do for the people of New York City was a really important strategic choice. And clearly he threaded that needle because, Trump was out there saying, I'd be perfectly happy to live in New York City under Zohran Mamdani. I mean, some of the things that came out of his mouth were absolutely shocking. And still, it's a sign of how clearly Mamdani was prepared and how he went into this meeting knowing what he wanted to gain, right? Similar to, by the way, helping working people, which of course has been a whole thing of Mamdani's platform. Now, Trump's version of helping working people is only helping working white people, but Mamdani obviously knows that, but also went in clearly with talking points that were designed to get Trump on board with the same agenda. And so all of this is very relevant. And I will say that it is skilled negotiation tactic by Mamdani, right? To get Trump on board and in love in the way that he was on Friday, you have to actually be very strategic about how you're going to talk to him about the things, and by the way, to all of MAGA, about the things that actually matter to the electorate, right? And I'm just going to point out other crazy thing here. We know Mamdani flipped Trump voters in New York City. There's been a lot of discussion about this actually in New York City local media. Trump said in the Oval Office meeting that it was 1 in 10 of his voters. Actually, what is showing in New York City was that in some places it was a much higher percentage than that. And Trump said he was fine with it, that he was fine with his own voters voting for Mamdani. How do you get to a point where that is actually the conclusion? Well, one of the ways that you get to the point where that's the conclusion is where you have set it up to make the president / MAGA think, correctly, by the way, that you are there to improve the lives of their base and that there is a meeting of the minds on that. Okay. Now, of course, they define their base, I have to say this again, as white men, but nonetheless, the policy determinations that are behind this actually, that as Mamdani apparently set them up, allowed Trump to be like, oh, actually, I endorse what this guy is doing. So, again, very interesting moment. Okay, fifth big takeaway is be sane. I'm not the only one who has made this observation, but one of the things that truly was interesting about the dynamic between the two of them is that, as folks have been pointing out, Mamdani may be the most well-adjusted person that Trump has seen in literally a year, because everyone surrounding him is nuts, a fascist, angry at everybody, a poser, on the fourth wife after a rape allegation, drunk, all of these things combined for, as we all know, a really unhealthy environment inside the White House and the executive branch. And Mamdani's a happy guy and kind of down to earth and really grounded. And I'm sure that in and of itself kind of helped to stabilize the conversation. All that said, I think there's a real contrast to be built heading into 2026 and also in our own work between like, I'm a reasonable, normal human being and like madness, crazy talk, right? On the other side of the fence. Okay. Last thing that, I think we have to kind of take away from this is the idea of the Mamdani campaign having campaigned on what benefits society. All right. And this is an interesting one. It kind of dovetails with what I was saying, like on item number 4 about finding common ground. But the Mamdani campaign, for those who don't know, this is how it started out. After Trump was elected last November, Mamdani, who at that point was like very unknown, polling in single digits, went around to all of these districts inside New York City and talked to people, including a lot of Trump voters, about why they had voted the way they voted or why they hadn't voted if they hadn't voted and what were the issues that they really cared about the most, right? And this thing of campaigning on how you can improve people's lives makes you a compelling figure, right? Because it takes you out of the realm of like, we're going to war with people because of how they look or what their identity is, or like because we hate them, and into a place of like, what are the solutions? And that is seductive, like legitimately so. I'm not claiming it's a con because it's not. It is seductive to everyone, right? Like, yes, Trump is enthralled with famous people. And yes, Mamdani is like handsome, attractive, looks good in a suit. But that's not the end of the game here, right? He actually is compelling at what he's trying to achieve. And so I can't help but think that there is an element of that went into all of this as well, that he is campaigning on the benefits that he brings to the table and not just against. So it removed the element of conflict, right? It's really about like, how can we find common ground so that we can build a better future for like the people that matter, right? Like, even though that's differently defined between the two of them. So incredibly well done by Mamdani. But also I just want to mention here, I've been saying this now for like months and months and months, but the Democrats really have an awful lot to learn, not just from Mamdani as like a generational talent in politics, but also in terms of how he has comported himself since he won, right? And there is no like wishy-washiness about it. He's not backing down to a bully. Like, this is another big lesson, by the way, that's a takeaway from this. Like, he didn't back down from Trump, right? He's not like withering or, caving or doing any of that other kind of stuff. He just is standing for what he stands for confidently and moving forward in a way that's going to benefit his people. And so, meaning the people he was elected to serve, which is all of New York City, like all 8+ million of them, right? Like, this is something that we really have to keep in mind here, is that, like, by the way, when you stand up to Trump, or you are just like, I'm not going to let you kind of like cut me down, I'm not going to be terrorized by you, I refuse to be cowed, not in a way that's even like, fuck you, right? But in a way that's like, I'm going to do my thing because it's the right thing and I'm good at it, right? That actually is something that tends to engender Trump's respect. And that, so it's a fascinating dynamic, but there's a lot to learn from it in terms of what we're going to be doing going into 2026. So those are my big kind of like secret takeaways. And I think these are all things that we need to be thinking about while we're organizing, right? Because these can apply to all of us, right? We don't sanitize our shared values. We don't sacrifice them, right? We don't back down and we don't cave. We speak the truth in everything that we do. We try to find common ground, even if it has to be done in a way that's like a careful dance around the edges. We're sane. We differentiate the normalcy of what we're doing from those who are crazy and acting out and like hate everybody and are on like, a nihilistic end of the world kind of trajectory. And we campaign on what benefits people, right? Not just like what we're fighting against. So all of these things really matter a lot. And I think we have a lot to learn. Okay, couple of other news items that we have to cover for today that came up on the Patreon feed. Reminder, if you are new here, please subscribe to this channel, give this broadcast a thumbs up, and please consider becoming a paid subscriber over at Patreon for as little as $5 a month. We are currently running a promotion through the end of the year where you can get 20% off annual subscriptions using the code FALL2025. You get to ask questions before every broadcast, you get to join our weekly bonus broadcast and everything else. So head on over there and check it out. All right, other issues. I just was about to lose my pen cap. Marjorie Taylor Greene has resigned. This one, I was asked on the Patreon feed this morning for my thoughts on this. And like pretty much every other commentator that I think is halfway smart, people are stumped by this one, because it's not just that she might run for governor. It's not just that she might run for president. It also doesn't even make sense that, like, she was directly threatened by Trump, right? Because lots of people, as Jasmine Crockett pointed out on the Sunday shows this week, lots of people are routinely threatened by Trump, and it doesn't make them quit. So, one of the things that we have to look at here is, like, what is the agenda? And even though, as I said last week, I'm glad, I suppose, that Marjorie Taylor Greene voted in favor of, releasing the Epstein files. I'm glad that she stood with survivors. I'm even glad that she apologized a week ago for being a part of the politics of division, quote unquote. Do I trust her? Hell no. And do I suspect that there's going to be, like, more to come from her? Absolutely. Do we know what the format of that's going to look like? No. There are people who are like, and I agree with this, by the way, she's probably going to have a podcast by the time we get to, like, she's resigning the day before the anniversary of January 6th. I bet she's got a podcast by February. But, nonetheless, it's kind of an interesting development. And as we've been talking about here on the broadcast over the last couple of weeks, there's a very obvious splintering of MAGA happening right now. That as well is a sign. Like, this is a sign of what's happening, because if someone who was as all in on MAGA, not to mention QAnon and a bunch of other kind of, like, conspiratorial theories as she is, can, like, decide that time's up and that she's looking beyond the Trump era, not only does that bode well for everybody who's been panicked about 2028, because he's not going to be running again, you guys, I'm just telling you right now, for anybody who's been panicked about that, but also for folks who are like, oh gosh, it's so terrifying because they're doing all this horrible stuff, which they are. That's a response to how weak they are. This is a sign of the fracture. This is really a sign of, like, their foundations crumbling. And so we've really got to kind of keep in mind that, this is yet another declination, right? I do want to respond to one thing, because there's a rumor that's been floating around that the reason why Marjorie Taylor Greene waited to resign was because her pension vests in January. I just want to point out that her pension, given the terms that she has served in the House, is minuscule, tiny, compared to her $25 million net worth. So anybody who's out there telling you that that's the reason why she's doing this, because now she's going to get a lifetime pension, doesn't know what they're talking about, okay? All right. We have to talk about what's happening in Venezuela, because it is, or about to happen to Venezuela, I should say, because it does look like Trump is on the verge of bombing Venezuela, if not invading it, for regime change, to overthrow Maduro. And, I have to say that I said this morning on Blue Sky, I'm old enough to remember 2 other Republican administrations invading a country for oil under false premises about terrorism and other things. And this is no different. Now, I have to also mention that it's illegal, because if he does this, not only will it be a violation of the War Powers Act, but it's also going to be a crime under international law and a whole number of treaties. I don't think that's enough to stop Trump at this point. And the real question and the real problem here, like, there's a series of them under international law. Like, there's been no overt act that would justify war called casus belli. There's nothing like that, okay? There's no endorsement by Congress. There's nothing here that justifies invasion. And this is the sort of thing that, in a member country at least, which of course we are not, will get you pulled in front of the International Criminal Court. So one of the things that, I want people to consider in all of this is that, first of all, there is an element of wag the dog to it, no question, right? The Epstein files are due to be released by the 19th of December, provided that the Attorney General does something there. I'm not convinced she's going to follow what the act requires. But also, it's about oil. And I think everybody should not forget that, okay? All right, so we're going to see what happens there. But it seems like it's imminent. There was news last night, actually, that they closed all airspace over Venezuela. So again, not what any of us want, also wildly illegal. I think, and by the way, I think there's going to be immediate pushback inside the GOP on this pretty quickly, assuming that it does happen. All right, I'm going to circle back to Marjorie Taylor Greene for one more minute, because there's some comments going by on the chat that I also want to point out. If you have $25 million, you do not need lifetime health coverage as a result of having served in the House of Representatives. So again, this is a point the moment when events like this happen, where you've really got to see the forest and not just the trees, okay? Something much larger is happening in Marjorie Taylor Greene's resignation that is not just about a minuscule pension or having her health coverage, right? Plus, she's going to have jobs for the whole rest of her life. Like, we all know that. So again, please be careful about who you listen to. Like, this is a moment where, like, you have to understand that the crumbling of MAGA is actually happening. Like, it's actually happening. And also that the larger picture of events like this provides context. It is not just like simple, right? It's not just like these tiny little fractional self-interest that for most of us would be life-altering, but for her is not, all right? So again, be cautious about where you're getting your information. I know I have to say that a lot on this broadcast. Please, please, please. Like, there's a lot of commentators out there right now who really don't know what they're talking about. And it's unfortunate because a lot of people in this audience also follow people like that and take them at their word when literally, like, they have no education in politics. They have no education in law. They've never been an activist, right? So again, like, be thoughtful about where you're consuming your information. All right, Kilmar Abrego Garcia. We had some very interesting developments in this case over the last few days. So you all may remember that it wasn't all that long ago that the DOJ under Trump told the court in the Kilmar Abrego Garcia criminal case. This is the case in Tennessee for the traffic stop. Remember that one where he didn't even get a ticket originally, and then they ginned up this indictment to try to keep him in custody? The DOJ told the court in that case that Costa Rica had turned down a request to be a site for deportation of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. And by the way, Kilmar Abrego Garcia was willing to be deported to Costa Rica, would agree to deportation to Costa Rica. By the way, if you're wondering why, I'm just going to remind you all, Costa Rica has no military, has a 99% literacy rate, and it's like incredibly welcoming to expats and foreigners, and, like, you know, generally has a really healthy lifestyle. It's like all sorts of things in that government are working very well, okay? So the DOJ said that Costa Rica turned them down, and the only option was Liberia, which is, of course, a country that Kilmar Abrego Garcia has no connection to, incredibly far removed from his family, not the country that he's from. Turns out, as the Costa Rican government told mainstream media over the weekend, well, I think it was Friday, actually, they're perfectly willing to take Kilmar Abrego Garcia. They never turned down any such offer. So it turns out the DOJ lied to a federal court in Tennessee when they claimed that Costa Rica had turned it down. So now Kilmar Abrego Garcia's attorneys have filed a pleading in that court, informing the court that the DOJ has lied to the judge. And you may remember that one of the reasons why that case is being, or has been requested by Kilmar Abrego Garcia's attorneys to be thrown out of court, is because of malicious prosecution. And I just have to point out, like, there's very little that would be more malicious than lying to a federal court judge about a country to which Mr. Abrego Garcia is willing to be deported, having turned down that request. It looks malicious. We're going to send him halfway around the world to another country that he has no relationship to, because we claim that this country, like in Central America, that he's willing to be deported to, won't take him. So all of that is really questionable. And I'm just going to say, like, it's not out of the realm of possibility that the entire indictment gets tossed. It should, by the way. Like, there really is no legal basis for his indictment. But in any event, lots of movement there, and we have yet to see what the judge is going to do with it. I expect there's going to be some motion on that quickly. Okay, a couple of other things we have to talk about. Somebody asked a question on the Patreon feed about the Epstein files versus the money, meaning like JP Morgan Chase's involvement in Epstein's finances and what would potentially happen there. So, you know, again, I have to remind you all that the files that we've seen so far are only out of the estate. We do not, there's apparently 300,000 pages of materials in the Epstein files inside the DOJ. We do not yet know what's going to be contained in them in terms of potential communications and or investigatory materials related to his financial dealings. I personally will tell you that I am very interested in how money moved to and through Jeffrey Epstein, partially because, as I said a couple of weeks ago, I don't think this is just like bribery and blackmail. In fact, quite the contrary. Everything that we've seen so far in the emails shows voluntary participation in the network that Epstein had, because it created connections and power for people who were in Epstein's inner circle. There's been no evidence so far that like he wrote to somebody and was like, you better pay me $100,000 because I have a photograph of you with a teenage girl. Now, for everybody who claims that like that wouldn't have happened in the emails, I will just tell you there's coded language in the emails that we've seen so far that indicates certain things that are not kosher. And so from this perspective, like, please understand that one of the things that I think is the most disgusting about what we've seen from Epstein is, and by the way, Anand Giridharadas wrote a really great piece about this in the New York Times yesterday that everybody should go read, about the Epstein class and what it benefited the super rich people who were a member of that class to be a part of it, right? The way in which power was traded and, you know, like huge world-changing decisions were made that had consequences for the rest of us, consequences for marginalized people, consequences for whole governments, right? That's what people wanted to be a part of. And that in and of itself is really twisted and disgusting. And one of the points that Anand makes in that piece is actually that being that rich inures you to the harm that you're causing. And that leads to other horrible criminal things, right? But keep in mind, okay, that how money moved to and through Jeffrey Epstein had more to do with like consensual transactions, I think, based on what we've seen so far, than anything else. Now, does that mean he wasn't involved in money laundering? No. Does it mean that like there might not have been a situation where somebody was paying for access to teenage girls? No. Does it mean that there might not have been the off circumstance where Epstein was like, you better not do X or you better pay me Y because I've got video of you? Maybe. But we haven't seen any evidence of that, okay? And so what happens on the money trail is going to be dependent on what gets produced from the DOJ. And I'm going to remind you all that we know that when Biden left office, there was an ongoing investigation in the Southern District of New York into Epstein's inner circles and like who was participating in them. We know that because we know Trump shut down those investigations. The DOJ shut them down, right? Maureen Comey, Jim Comey's daughter, was a part of those investigations and was fired. Okay, so again, there's a lot more that the DOJ could have been looking at under Biden, including financial transactions that we don't yet know about. And so the short answer to the question is like, I can't tell you, nobody can, what's going to happen with JP Morgan Chase. But is there a possibility, or other institutions for that matter, is there a possibility that what we learned from the Epstein files could lead to additional investigation? Sure. We will have to see. All right. Couple of other quick things here. Lots of people want me to talk about the Ukraine deal this morning. And I have to tell you guys that like, there's really only one takeaway from all of this. And it's one that we already know because Rubio said it, which is that the U.S. went into these negotiations with a set of talking points that were provided by the Russians. They're now denying that, right? But there's a clear through line here of platforms with regard to ending the conflict in Ukraine that track all the way back to people like Paul Manafort, and that, as Rubio himself has said, came from the Russian delegation. All right. So I don't know what more anybody needs out of that. I also personally, this is just one place where like, I have lost my capacity to be surprised or outraged. I don't know why anybody would think that the United States under Donald Trump was doing anything other than parroting Russian talking points with regard to Ukraine. So, it is what it is. I'm also just going to point out that every other major European leader opposed this plan in writing. And, one of the things that that's going to mean is that like Russia's not going to get everything that they want. So, I know that I'll just warn everybody because, I even got some private messages from people over the weekend about this and stuff. You have to kind of like, this is one of those areas where it is really important to temper your expectations because it's quite possible to get outraged about like everything. And believe me, I have a family member who lives in Paris, 1,500 miles from the Ukraine border. I'm very attuned to the potential threats to Europe. Like, if this deal doesn't work out in a way that benefits Ukraine, right? I understand that. And simultaneously, I'm not at all shocked by any of this. And I kind of feel like it's been engineered in such a way where it's designed to make people really, really outraged for the sake of ignoring other things. I'm not saying it's a distraction. Nothing's a distraction. You all know my perspective on that. But I want people to kind of like, again, temper your responses. Did you really expect Rubio to go in with like a set of talking points that was going to benefit Ukraine? Does everybody remember what the first impeachment was about? Okay. Like, again, this was kind of to be expected. It doesn't make it right. Doesn't make it morally justifiable, but it was kind of to be expected. Okay. All right. Final thing today, which is super fun and also totally unsurprising, is that for those who haven't been following this, X, formerly known as Twitter, changed what they would reveal publicly about certain accounts over the weekend, okay? And what that means is that they have now started publishing the location from which certain accounts originate, okay? And it has revealed, so you have to laugh so you don't cry. It has revealed that a massive number of right-wing MAGA influencer accounts that appear to be people living inside the United States complaining about illegal immigrants. Again, no person is legal. That's their language, not mine. Claiming that, like, we need a white nation, that, we need more white babies, right? That Charlie Kirk is an icon, Turns out the vast majority of those accounts are from India, Russia, or Nigeria. And it's fascinating to watch this, including one huge name influencer who shall remain nameless because I don't want to put a target on my back, who has been acting like he's been inside the United States forever and currently lives in Dubai. So again, I just have to point out, I have been saying this for years and years and years and years. And yes, I haven't been on Twitter since the 2022 midterms, but I'm just going to say it again, okay? The vast majority of Twitter traffic, even under Dorsey, that was claiming to be MAGA was either bots or accounts that had been purposefully set up to create division inside the United States that did not exist, to claim that MAGA had a base that it does not have. Okay. And, one of the things that has been incredibly effective about this is that it has made people on our side of the fence feel overwhelmed and like it's totally beyond our control what's happening in this country. All right. It's not. So much of this is farmed and engineered. And so please keep in mind, and that includes, by the way, the traffic. Some of these accounts that were started by bad actors outside of the US that have millions and millions and millions of followers and millions and millions and millions of reposts. That's not real traffic either. And of course, the worst part is these accounts are getting paid now by Musk. So once again, I have to point out that you have to be really suspicious of anyone claiming that MAGA has a huge foothold inside the United States right now. It does not. There was a poll this morning, by the way, speaking of Venezuela, that 70% of Americans, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, 70% of Americans oppose a United States invasion of Venezuela. The polling on this, by the way, the numbers are not changing much right now. The polling on the shutdown, the polling on Venezuela, the polling on the economy has Trump in the 30s or below in terms of approval ratings. So once again, I have to point out that just because it looks like they're winning doesn't mean they are. And that one of the real downsides of social media is that content is engineered, often by bad actors, to terrify you, to make you angry, to profit on the back of your central nervous system, and to convince you not to take action. So let this be a lesson to everybody, albeit a lesson that I know Elon Musk didn't intend to teach, that, we are not as underwater as we might think. And that's not to minimize ICE raids, right? Not to minimize the harm being done to trans people, resulting in some instances in suicides. It's not to minimize any of that, but it is to point out that we are way more powerful than they want us to believe. So with that, I will end a little bonus Monday broadcast. We have a training video coming up on our sister channel, the Ripple Effect Institute, in 27 minutes that you're all going to want to watch. I will make sure that is cross-posted to this YouTube channel in the post section. And also, I will be here Tuesday and Wednesday regular time. I am off on Thursday and Friday, all right? And then once again, please thumbs up, subscribe. Please consider becoming a Patreon subscriber for as little as $5 a month. Again, this is not my day job. That money helps me to pay my tech team behind the scenes and also helps me to feed my kids because I take time away from my regular job to do this every day. And I would greatly appreciate your support, especially as we head into the holidays and with my ACA health insurance premiums going up so much come January 1st. All right. Thank you all so much for your support. I will see you here Tuesday and Wednesday. Happy early Thanksgiving to all of you. Grateful for all of your support and subscriptions. And I will catch you all back here tomorrow at regular time. All right. Bye. That's our show for today, folks. Thanks so much for being here at Resistance Live. To get more out of the show, including bonus broadcasts, the answers to all your most pressing political and legal questions, and way more, head on over to patreon.com/resistancelive and become a paid subscriber. And don't forget to hit subscribe here on your favorite podcasting platform to make sure that you never miss an episode. See you next time.